What secret was revealed when cleaning out the home of a deceased family member? Cleaning out my grandpa's apartment, we found different pieces of a handgun scattered around. He struggled on and off with depression, and apparently he did it so that if he was thinking about suicide, he would have to go find all the parts and give himself time to talk himself out of it. My dad kept a handwritten note in his wallet, containing my mom's old address, phone number, and directions to her house from when they first started dating in the 70s. He had moved it from wallet to wallet over the years. He just died this past March, and that was one of the first things we found. Not a secret but a near secret. My grandfather, who spoke English as a third language, was a bit of a hoarder. Lots of old shit stockpiled in his basement, but well organized. Imagine a generic episode of Hoarders, but with a prepper OCD vibe. Everything was sanitized, stacked/nested, and grouped logically. It was like the stock room for a store that wasn't yet sure what products it was selling and wanted to be ready. So we find a cylindrical container that was kinda heavy for its size, and it had the label "Old Penis." It was one of those black plastic film containers. Hesitant, but curious, we removed the lid. It contained a collection of 1-cent pieces which had been minted in the first half of the 20th century. Part of me is disappointed, part of me is relieved. Grandpa did drawings of the faces of the people he killed in World War II. Nobody knows why, but my grandma said he had a lot of guilt over the things he saw, so my guess is he didn't want to forget them or didn't feel like he should be allowed to forget them. User replies. My grandfather, who was in Italy, on Omaha and in the Bulge, did something similar. Every evening before bed, he'd visualize the German soldiers he had killed and would say prayer for each, and ask for forgiveness from them. In a way, I think he felt feeling the pain of remembering them every day was his penitence. User replies. My grandfather was a gunner in World War II. He sit in a plane and shoot down on people as the plane flew over them. He very rarely talked about it. When me and my kids were living in a subsidized government housing complex, I was on food stamps. I told my grandfather that I was so ashamed. He said, "Get every single penny you can get out of the government. The government owes me and mine for all eternity, for the horrors I was forced to commit." User replies. I love him so much for saying that to you. What an amazing man your grandfather was. User replies. My grandpa did that in the Pacific. He also stormed islands. The Japanese fought to the last man. Any Marine that fought on that front definitely saw some horrific shit. He never talked about it with anybody, but I researched the battles he participated in. Guadalcanal was one of them. I can't even begin to imagine what that was like. User replies. My grandfather struggled with what he did in World War II his entire life. He took his story to the grave with him, we assume out of shame. What we've been able to piece together is that he was a member of the SS, lied about his age when he enlisted, joining up at 14, probably consumed by all the propaganda, and got shot down over the UK sometime during the Blitz. He wasn't a pilot, which meant probably a gunner, or someone controlling the bombs. He could have been responsible for hundreds of civilian casualties and we'll never know. After the war he ended up staying in the UK, became a citizen, married a farm girl and had 4 kids. I have to imagine that his time in the prisoner of war camp changed his perspective and he came to realize the SS was truly evil. Unfortunately we'll never know. A diary with only a few entries from my uncle who lived alone. One of the entries was about how sad he was to have never met anyone or had children and how lonely he was. Broke my heart. I'm African American and my husband is white. My father faced a lot of prejudice during his lifetime and I was terrified of telling him that the white guy I'd been on a date or two with, I was getting serious with. The first time I brought my now husband home, my dad was courteous, but distant. Miraculously, by the second time my father literally gushed all over my husband. Even my siblings were shocked. When we got married, he was beaming. It was odd, but I was just happy my husband had won him over. My mom died in 2014 and my father in 2021. When my siblings and I went to clean out the house, in his safe along with other important documents, we found letters that my husband had written to my father 24 years before, about how he felt about me, how he was serious about his relationship with me, how he was planning to go to law school, he's an attorney now, how he respected that he'd gone through so much in his lifetime, and eventually how he loved me and how with his blessing, he was going to propose. My husband never told me he'd written my father and my father never told me he'd been corresponding with my husband. It was so emotional finding those. I still tear up when I think about it. When I got home, my husband finally showed me the letters my father had written back. That my dad hid money all over the house, not huge amounts, mind you, but $60 here, $120 there. Felt like a bit of a scavenger hunt when we were cleaning out his stuff. He was always a bit of a sneakily generous guy, always gave me and my brothers a secret handshake with money tucked in his palm, when we'd go back to school after a weekend home, etc., so wouldn't be surprised if he'd done it intentionally. Made us smile every time we found some. I think the final total was somewhere around $800. User replies. I deal with deceased estates as my job and have to go into houses to collect paperwork etc. One home of an elderly lady I found £15,000 in cash, stuffed all over the place, just in envelopes in stacks of opened post. Another house I went to recently I found almost £9,000 in various envelopes. User replies. Quite a few years back, my dad discovered that the nice old widower across the street, whom he sorta befriended by shoveling the driveway and bagging leaves and just going over to chat with when the kids wouldn't do anything but watch TV, had something like $200,000 stashed in his mattress, the remainder of what he'd earned by having a good job, retiring at 65, and living, along with his wife, a pretty modest lifestyle. They never had children. My dad gently convinced the neighbor that banks were safe now, and explained the FDIC, and eventually convinced him to put it in a bank. The first bank they tried called the cops on my dad because he was clearly taking advantage of this kind elderly senior. What? But, okay then. Cops advised them to get an attorney, which ate into the neighbor's funds a bit, but they managed to get the money into a bank, savings, and checking. And my dad taught him to balance his checkbook. It was a hassle at the time, but I think back on it as being very sweet. My dad was totally appalled and hugely worried when they got all the cash out and counted it, and then when he had to patiently explain the Federal Reserve in detail multiple times, and the first bank did that, and they had to find a good lawyer, all of which took at least a month. They became pretty good friends, though my dad always called him Mr. rather than using his first name. That my father committed suicide and did not die of a heart attack. That he was a cop under investigation for theft and took the quick way out. User replies. I found out my grandmother committed suicide about 20 years after the fact. I had been 5 when it happened. All through childhood, I was led to believe she died from cancer. And that my grandfather was traveling. In fact, he was in and out of jail for years from drink-related incidents following his wife's suicide. Thankfully he's been clean and sober for the last 20+ years. Found my grandparents' wedding certificate, which didn't match the date everyone else had. Their original date was 9 months before my aunt was born. The certificate was dated about 5 months before she was born. User replies. That seems to have happened a lot back then. My great-grandparents did something similar, but instead of changing their wedding date, they pushed the date of my great-uncle's birthday back a few months to make it look like he was born 9 months after the wedding. You already made it halfway through the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Let's continue. Cleaning out my grandparents' house after they passed away. We found a booklet on sexual anatomy, a penis eraser, a penis that my grandma had crocheted, and there were walnuts in the nut sack, and a drawing my grandpa did of my grandma wearing nothing but a feather boa. My dad was in hospice at home for a couple months before he died of lung cancer, and when I went to clean out his house I found that he had already sorted and packed away most of his personal treasures in couple storage bins. It was heartbreaking all over again thinking of him sitting there packing up his own life and knowing it was coming to an end. User replies. My uncle committed suicide, and when I went to his apartment to clean it out, I saw that he'd given it so much thought. He'd given away all his valuables. Family pictures were sorted by year stacked neatly on a table. He'd gone to the bank and cleared out his accounts and safety deposit box out, assuming he gave the money away. He signed his paid-off car registration over to my aunt, the youngest sibling, and left a note to give her the keys, and all his good clothes like suits, dress shoes, dress shirts, were packed up for donation, so that someone down on their luck might be able to wear them to an interview. It was clean and organized, which wasn't really his style. His place was always cluttered and lived a messy lifestyle. He was the life of the party, he was always popular and well-liked and fun, and he must have been so sad. He was only 54. My dad passed away in 1994, I was 28. While going through his safe I found some adoption papers. While reading through them, I got excited at the prospect. I might have a brother out there somewhere. I was raised as an only child, but couldn't understand why my parents never told me that they'd adopted a child but never told me. After rereading them, I realized that they papers were about me. After confronting my family about this, turns out everyone, family, close friends, I mean everyone, knew I was adopted. Except me. That was a fun day. We cleaned out my grandparents' home and we found a letter from my sister to Grandpa. I hate the new baby. All she does is cry, cry, cry. She is a crying witch. That baby was me, thanks sis. Nan was rich as duck. She left 90% of her money to a dog charity. Didn't bother me, but my cousins still haven't got over it. After my grandfather died, I asked my dad to quietly go through his dad's bedroom, while I took my grandmother out to lunch. I explained that Granddad might have racy magazines about, that would be upsetting to Grandma if she found them. So just, be a good son and save your mom from that. When we got back, my dad was nearly hysterical, half laughing, half barfing, and pulled me into the garage to debrief. Apparently, my grandfather was exactly the devout Catholic that he had appeared to be, and what my poor father had found in the bedside table was a stack of cheesecake pictures, of his own mother. My parents were getting back together. Dad died at 50 of a heart attack, Mom was devastated. Her health declined rapidly and she died at 49 3 months later. I cleaned out both their homes and found calls, texts, and love letters. They wanted to be together again, but didn't want to put their kids and grandkids through a reconciliation, until they were confident it would work out. I knew she'd be devastated. They had been together almost 30 years, but they were 2 years divorced and casually seeing other people. They seemed to be thriving apart, so it was a shock when the grief was so strong, that it took all the life out of her. She died of cancer, but the doctor also diagnosed her with failure to thrive, brought on by the loss of my dad, and said that it may have been possible for her to live longer and even receive treatment, if the failure to thrive hadn't taken everything she was before her cancer diagnosis. The only thing worse than losing my dad was watching my mom live without him, so at the end of the day, I'm grateful she didn't live without him for long. She never would have had peace here again. She found her peace with him on the other side. Mine was confirmation of a wild story. My grandfather served in Korea. For years there was a tall tale about how he won a house in Korea, unsure how to phrase this politely online, that it included the family who owned it and essentially anyone who worked there in a game of poker. That when he returned home, after a few years of receiving letters and small payments, my grandmother told him to give the ownership back to the family. I don't think anyone really believed him when the story was told, over and over again. My grandmother died when I was young, so couldn't ask her if it was true. When he passed away and we were cleaning out the house, we found the letters from the family and the letter from the lawyer Gramps used to officially return ownership. My grandpa owned a pleasure house in Korea, is a sentence that's hard to say. They found out my grandmother lied about her age to her second husband. Keep in mind this was the 1940s. Her age on her marriage license was 6 years younger than she actually was. My mom learned her dad has another family. We met them a few years ago. I, as a joke once, made thong underwear on a merch website with my cat's face on them and my signature. The description just said, "So you can wear my pussy on your pussy." My friends found this hilarious and bought them up, of course. I got numerous Snapchats of thong photos for a while. We forgot about this for years. My best friend passed away in a motorcycle accident last year. His family called me while cleaning out his house a month or so after. They were wondering why they found thongs with my signature in his closet. I never thought I'd have to explain that one. Luckily, they thought it was incredible and we all shared some good laughs. My grandaunt was incredibly rich. My grandfather was just one of 4 siblings, and he gave each of his grandchildren a 5-digit share, just because he had no idea what to do with the money that suddenly popped up. All the years we knew her, we had no reason to assume she had money, never worked, widowed early, and her partner, who was dead for 30+ years when she followed him, hadn't been rich neither. Unfortunately, we only discovered that among other things she owned 2 houses next to the one she was living in, but we never found out how she got that money. She had been walking around like a beggar, always used products already long past their use by date, and her home wasn't modernized after the 60s. The money just popped up everywhere, in every drawer. And both homes generated rent income, but even this didn't explain the amount of money. There were hints for another house she owned, but apparently it was already sold at the time of her death. It all remained an unsolvable mystery to us. My grandfather, the other one, not the one mentioned before, was in the Nazi Party. My father had denied this, but I found proof for it in the documents. He then admitted it, but told me he was forced to join. Given the documents I found and the time he joined, etc., I believe this was the truth. The worst tiny secret in my eyes, one of the few moments in my life I completely lost my shit, was after my mother's loss. I found a small birthday gift she had already bought for me, a small angel with some lines hoping that I'm always protected. Words can't describe my anger and frustration with the world when I found this. After all, I was clearing out the house, after she had been brutally murdered. A family friend, 50s, was moving stuff from his mother's storage locker after she passed, opened a box of documents, and inside was his adoption papers. He was adopted. Turns out his aunt, who is significantly younger, had a teen pregnancy, and to avoid controversy at the time, the newly married older sister just adopted him. I was cleaning out my grandparents' house and found photos from my mom's first wedding. She never told me she was married before my dad. I finally talked to her about it the other day. According to her, it doesn't count because she had it annulled. My mom didn't even spend the wedding night with him. She called my grandpa and made him come get her. My mom only married the guy as a way to get back at her ex-boyfriend that she was in love with. She's now on her technically 4th marriage, and it's to a woman. I guess she gave up on men. Big thanks to everyone who watched the entire video. We're aiming for 250 subscribers by the end of the year. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. Drop a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll catch you in the next one.